The next point I would make on your bigger point is you can't bring China and India into an economic discussion on the environment unless you try. In other words, unless you try. So this is a place where the world, particularly in Asia, looks to US for leadership. Basically, Europe has achieved leadership, but without the US engaging, if you will, in that discussion in Asia, you're not going to be able to create any tapestry of long-term solutions, particularly on things like the environment. So at the end of the day, it gets back to this engagement point that I think if you're ever going to build either a financial system or an environmental system that is global, you're going to have people on both sides talking about what it would mean, setting broad guidelines and rules, and I think that's something that needs to happen over time. Yeah. Shout it out. Go ahead and shout it out and I'll repeat it.
Okay. Thank you, Primo. My name is Ben Gomez-Casser from Brandeis International Business School. I'd like to ask you again about the reset that you started your talk with. Thank you. The question of reset, in particular the business-government relationship that you said is being reset, and in particular in the renewable energy field. Tom Friedman, in his new book, asks the question, what does it take for a company like yours and others in the field to go all in renewable energy? And he concludes that it has to do with a new regulatory environment, maybe even a very high oil price, and keep it there. My question to you is, what does it take for GE and for others in your industry to go all in, to make a big bet on renewable energy? I don't mean energy independence per se, but energy renewability. What will it take, and what is realistic for us to expect, given the political environment, from the regulatory environment that might change?
So, what I would say is, in financial services, the government has had to do certain things, right? And they've been aggressive at doing it. And I actually think pretty effective. I'd say the last 2 weeks, the credit markets seem better, and some of the government work seems to be kind of effective. I think as a backdrop, this notion that the government really, that the markets do I'm a free market guy, and I'm fundamentally Republican. I just say that just as context, right? I'm not here to convert anybody, but just as context for what I'm about to say. This notion that the government doesn't do anything and the free market does everything just doesn't happen to be true. Just doesn't happen to be, if you actually look at data and facts, it doesn't happen to be true. And we're have a pretty good perspective because we're in almost every business in the world. We're in a lot of businesses, so I don't say that, I'm not just making this up, I actually can observe it over time. And if you look at the R&D spend from World War II till today, it's driven by the Department of Defense, by NASA, by big government programs that have proven to be a positive catalyst for change over time. And I say that as a consummate free marketeer here, right? Just first context. Second, if you were coming in to lead this country right now, like Senator Obama, President-elect Obama is, he's here and say, okay, what's on my to-do list? You got to do something about Iraq. You're going to have to do something about this financial crisis. I think you're going to have to do something that reestablishes the U.S.'s place in the world. It's just going to have to do that. And then I would pick one problem that our society could solve. Now, would you pick the easiest problem or the hardest problem? I'd pick the easiest one, right? I'd pick an easy one that actually is quite solvable. That to me is clean energy. That to me is clean energy. Healthcare, let me tell you guys, is really, 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 really hard. Really hard. Healthcare is important, critically important, but it is a morass, it is hard, clean energy is off-the-shelf technology that just has to be commercialized. You can take them down the cost curve. I could give you 5 or 6 steps right now. Boone Pickens can give you a few. There's a bunch of you that can give you a few. And so I sit here and say that ought to be a pretty high priority. And clean energy is a combination technology and it's public policy. And you can't do it without doing both. Technology, we've got to invest in renewables, we've got to invest in smart grids, we've got to invest in big baseload technologies like nuclear, clean coal. You're going to have to do probably 7 or 8 things at once technically, all of which are possible, don't require any inventions. And then from a public policy standpoint, look, if you're a CEO of a utility today and you decide to invest in any technology, it's a 50-year life. So you have to have some sense that the price signal you're getting today can be sustained over a generation. And that's where things like renewable portfolio standards, a price for carbon, those things can take place. And anybody that can step in, a political leader that says, okay, I'm going to endorse these technologies, or at least try to encourage them through renewable portfolio standards, things like that, on one side, and sets a regime where pricing is more transparent and more well known over a long time, which you can read in Tom's book, it has a chance of getting this solved. And I think this is eminently solvable and ought to be, creates jobs, and is something that we ought to take on relatively quickly. So what does it take for, we're already all in. In other words, if none of that stuff happened, it's too late for me. I got $3 billion R&D spend, I got products in the pipeline, and if I can't sell them here, I'll sell them in China or Turkey or someplace else. So it's not like I sit here needing to get a little cookie so that I'll go, like a good little boy, I'll go invest more money. It helps me if somebody does it, but I'm already all in. But I think that's how you get people committed. And I just think it's an economic winner. There's just not a lot of downside to doing that kind of stuff right now. Way in the back, yeah. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for your succinct speech and answering all these questions. Really interesting talk this morning. My name is Lior. I work for Nexen, an energy company in Canada. And my question is picking up on this point that you talked about, gearing technology towards some of the largest social problems, which you're addressing a little bit already in your answers here. But I'm wondering, around this issue of innovation, typically what happens is innovation is done in the context of our world here, in the Western world. Whereas, the 4 billion people living in the bottom of the pyramid live in a very, very different world. And innovation for the developing world looks a lot different. And so I'm wondering if GE has processes in place where either it's a partnership with sort of the barefoot kind of example, innovators on the ground who really understand the context of what it means to serve local people with clean water, for example, in the developing world. The kind of innovative processes that really take into account the vastly different context.
So great question. I would make a couple points in context, which is it is really hard for any company over time to do things that it sees no profit for ever. And so we always put things through some kind of, in other words, like we ought to have a GE Foundation. We ought to be generous with our time and money. We ought to do a lot of things that have nothing to do with profit, but are generally going to drive reputation and things like that. I get that. But I would say that what we try to do is create a business model for almost really everything we do. Now, we also are a very global company, and we kind of, inside our company, talk about kind of 5 phases of globalization. And I won't bore you with what those are, but kind of the 5th phase says that's the phase at which you're kind of fully embedded in an economy. You're developing markets for the high, medium, and low ends of those economies outside the United States. And you're bringing those value products back to the developed world.